Hello crafty friends, it's Jess and I'm here for Mint Owl Studios Mint Monday with Jess Crafts, and I am going to be sharing two different Easter cards today, one which is considerably more detailed than the other, just to give you two different looks for Easter as it is coming up quite soon, and there is a gorgeous set available from Mint Owl Studio for it, where the February release is already in the shop, and so if you order now you'll still have plenty of time to make your cards. When I first saw these crosses, I thought that they would work really well with some wood grain paper, and so I'm picking out a few pieces of my mind's eye wood grain paper here. I also like this stamp set for Bible journaling. I have seen a lot of people getting into that lately, and I thought that this would be a beautiful set for that because it has some great expressions in it, but also being able to use those banners or the crosses repeatedly, I could see that coming up a lot. So I'm going to stamp the cross on the light colored piece of pattern paper because I want to do some coloring and some paper piecing, and then I'm also going to stamp it on the darker piece of pattern paper because the darker piece is going to be kind of like my base, and then the lighter pieces I'll be paper piecing on. Because this is a relatively large stamp, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult to get a great impression. So even though these are really high quality photopolymer stamps made in the US, if you don't apply great pressure to the middle of them, you can lose a little bit of detail. One way around this is to use the MISTI because you can stamp repeatedly in the same spot, and that's what I'm doing here. However, there are some other alternatives. Something like VersaFine ink gives a really great impression really easily, and so you could always do that. Also, you can place a pad underneath your stamping, and that might give you a little bit better of an impression, and then also just make sure that you really evenly apply pressure. Thinner stamp blocks are sometimes easier for that. But today I want to use the My Favorite Things Black Licorice Hybrid ink because I am going to be doing a little bit of Copic coloring, and it will give me a nice dark impression. I actually stamp it a few times to make sure that it is a really dark black. Then I want to add this sentiment. This stamp set is called Peace Be With You, and there is a few stamps in the set that actually fit inside this cross, including the Peace Be With You, the Thinking of You, and the Easter Blessings. I want to make sure that the positioning is perfect, however, because it is a little bit of a tight fit. It looks great, however, you do want to make sure your placement's good, so I just use the MISTI to guarantee that. Then once that's finished, I'm ready for my Copic coloring. I'm going to be doing a lot of fussy cutting very soon, but I wanted to keep the Copic coloring simple, especially because these are supposed to be Easter lilies, which are mostly white. However, they have a little bit of green in the center. And so I'm just going to lay down a little bit of like a YG13 and then blend it out with a W00. Rather than blending it out with a colorless blender, which will just push the color around, the W00 gives you a little bit softer of a blend while still making the flowers appear white. Then I'm just going to use two different colors for the leaves since they have a little bit more area for detail and they would be solid green. So I think I have a G14 and a YG13, but whatever two greens you have that are close. In these small areas, you don't have to have perfect matches. So I'll continue with the darker green in those little extra bits of leaf on the outside. Then it was time for some crazy fussy cutting. I don't know what I was thinking when I decided to cut out all these little teeny tiny pieces. However, I do really love the result. So if you are not a fan of fussy cutting, you may not want to make this card exactly the way that I did. However, I am going to show sort of an easier alternative to a similar card, taking advantage of these gorgeous crosses. So I just kind of colored and fussy cut all those little pieces out and then added them back onto the card. However, if you want to do a little bit more of a clean and simple version of this card, what I'm doing here is lining up the stamps on a piece of dark wood grained cardstock or pattern paper here, and then I'm going to be stamping them with Versamark ink, which is a clear sticky ink, and gold embossing them. I really liked the way that the gold embossing sentiment turned out on my first card, and so I thought that I would take advantage of that look and create a sort of clean and simple card. I imagine that this card would be good if you wanted to sort of mass produce these for like a church group or something like that, where you had to make a whole bunch of cards. I know a couple people who make cards for their church, and the church kind of sends them out to community members, and so this would be perfect for that because you could place them perfectly positioned on the MISTI and then stamp a few different pieces of wood grain cardstock at one time. So there's the cross and the Happy Easter sentiment, and to save some time you can skip out on that middle sentiment or you can add it later, which I will do. And I'm going to sprinkle this gold embossing powder all over it and then sort of flick it off. I think that it's super important to use your anti-static bag before you start with the embossing powder, as it does have a tendency to catch. It's particularly staticky. I find some powders are more staticky than others, and you're going to see here on the second go around I accidentally forget to use that static bag and my results aren't quite as crisp. However, I think one of the things about this stamp set is because there's already so much detail to it, you can keep it so simple with something like this and still have a great card. So I'm going to move my MISTI off to the side as I sprinkle the embossing powder on here, because underneath the stamping area is a foam pad, and so if you heat on top of that you are going to melt the foam and could affect your MISTI. So just keep that in mind, as I tend to just kind of layer things on my desk, but you do have to be careful when using heat. So I'm going to use my heat gun to melt the embossing powder, and you do generally want to make sure that your heat gun is heated up before you start, and so since I'd recently done some, it didn't take too long, but you may need as much as 30 seconds to get the heat gun ready. Then you want to make sure that it embosses quickly, and so but also keep it moving, because if you concentrate in one area too long it can really curl up the papers. And I did have to add quite a bit of adhesive to get these cards to flatten out a little bit. When you're doing large areas of embossing, that can be a little bit problematic. And so I'm actually going to be finished with both cards now. I have the original one with the intricate fussy cutting for a very special person, and then the more simple card also for a special person, but somebody when you need to make cards a little bit quicker. So you can be sure to like this video if you found some of these tips helpful, share what you're planning to do with the February release, and join us over on Facebook or on the blog to share more of your creations, as we definitely love to see what you're making with Mint Owl Studio. Thanks for watching. Bye.